time, the voice of Woodward Bernstein was not to be heard of at all. It was all about Nixon. Nixon controlled the universe at that time.
He was the golden boy of Hollywood, graceful, grounded, and unshakably private. While others chased headlines and feuded publicly, Robert Redford seemed untouchable, a quiet force in a chaotic industry. But behind that calm exterior were years of strained partnerships, creative clashes, and silent decisions that shaped his legendary career.
He warned me before we went into it and it ended up being one of the most enjoyable relationships I've ever had.
Robert Redford has long been seen as the definition of calm under pressure. While the chaos of Hollywood consumed many of his contemporaries, some falling to scandal, others fading from the spotlight, Redford quietly kept working, creating, and building a reputation as one of the most respected figures in American film. From the 1960s through the early 2000s, he became known for thoughtful roles, directorial precision, and a distinct ability to remain above the fray. Unlike many major actors of his era, Redford didn't chase headlines, avoided tabloid gossip, and rarely spoke publicly about personal or professional conflicts. As he entered his later years, Redford began to reflect more openly. In private conversations and in some rare off-the-record moments captured by those close to him, he's acknowledged that not all of his collaborations were easy or even bearable. Despite his calm exterior, there were tensions behind the scenes. Certain actors, no matter how talented, brought with them difficult dynamics that left a lasting mark on Redford's career and his perspective on the craft of acting. One of the earliest and most significant clashes was with Gene Hackman. Both men were at the height of their careers when they appeared in Downhill Racer, a 1969 sports drama that Redford starred in and produced. Although the film itself was relatively low budget and quietly received at the time, it became a key moment in Redford's career as he started to take more control behind the camera. Hackman, already known for his intensity and emotional rawness, brought a very different energy to the set. From the beginning, it was clear they didn't share the same working style. Redford was known for his quiet, calculated approach to scenes. He preferred multiple takes to refine his delivery and work closely with directors to shape the emotional pacing of a story. Hackman, by contrast, had a reputation for working more instinctively. His performances were often described as powerful and unpredictable. This rawness made him compelling on screen, but on set, it sometimes created friction. Several people involved in the production of Downhill Racer have spoken over the years about the difficult dynamic between the two actors. While there was mutual respect early on, that quickly shifted to distance. Hackman was known to get frustrated during rehearsals, sometimes arguing over small details or disregarding direction if he felt it didn't suit his interpretation of a character. Redford, who valued a collaborative atmosphere, often found himself frustrated by this volatility. One particularly difficult incident occurred during a key emotional scene. Hackman reportedly became upset over how the lighting had been set up, insisting it made him look bad on camera. He refused to leave his trailer, delaying production. The director attempted to reason with him, but the situation remained unresolved until Redford himself walked over to speak with Hackman. What happened next was witnessed by several crew members. Redford, normally calm and diplomatic, told Hackman directly, "This isn't your movie, Gene, it's a team effort. Show up or step aside." Hackman eventually returned to set, and the scene was completed, but the working relationship never recovered. After the film wrapped, Redford and Hackman did not remain in contact. In private, Redford reportedly referred to Hackman as a sledgehammer in a violin shop, a metaphor that captured how he viewed Hackman's style as clashing with more delicate performances or creative environments. Redford never denied Hackman's talent. In fact, in more than one private conversation, he said that Hackman was one of the greatest actors of their generation. But he also made it clear that he believed talent wasn't enough if it came at the cost of a healthy working process. Hackman's intensity might have delivered strong performances, but it also created tension on set and made collaboration difficult. According to people close to Redford at the time, He quietly removed Hackman's name from future casting discussions. On at least one project in the late 1970s, Hackman was initially considered for a supporting role, but Redford wrote a brief note in the margins of the script. Not worth it. It wasn't just a personal issue. Redford had begun to step more fully into producing and directing. For him, the experience of making a film had to be as carefully shaped as the final product. He wanted consistency, respect among cast and crew, and a shared focus on the story. Hackman's presence, while creatively explosive, was also unpredictable. Directors often had to manage his outbursts or mediate conflicts between him and co-stars. Redford didn't want that kind of environment. In an interview much later in life, Redford was asked if he regretted not working with Hackman again. He paused, offered a small smile, and said, "Some pairings only need to happen once." It was a diplomatic answer, but it reflected what had become an unspoken reality in his career. Despite being two of the most recognizable names of their time, Redford and Hackman never shared the screen again. The divide between them was never a public feud. There were no headlines or tabloid stories, no late-night interviews mentioning the fallout. But for those inside the industry, it became well known that the two men didn't work well together. Directors and producers took note, and while their careers occasionally ran in parallel, both men earning Academy Awards, both working with top-tier directors, they never crossed paths again, in a professional sense. Redford's relationship with Hackman serves as an early example of a broader pattern in his career. While he avoided drama in the press, he was quietly selective behind the scenes. He placed a high value on professionalism, and when that standard wasn't met, or when an actor's behavior disrupted the work, he chose to walk away. Over the decades, this approach shaped not just his filmography, but also the way he was viewed by the industry: respectful, measured, and fiercely committed to the process. In hindsight, Redford's handling of the Hackman situation says more about him than it does about Hackman. Rather than escalate or seek revenge, he made a quiet decision and moved forward. His focus remained on the work, the story, and the integrity of the filmmaking process. And while audiences continued to enjoy both actors' performances separately, their brief, strained partnership became a footnote in two otherwise remarkable careers. Robert Redford's career was built on subtlety, discipline, and a calm, methodical approach to storytelling. He was never one to raise his voice or chase attention. Instead, he focused on creating films that were thoughtful, carefully crafted, and often socially or politically relevant. But in the world of filmmaking, not everyone works the same way, and for Redford that meant occasional but deeply felt clashes with other actors whose methods, energy, or even personal views disrupted the kind of working environment he valued. One such example was James Woods. While the two never appeared in a completed film together, their interactions during the casting process left a lasting impression on Redford, and not a positive one. Woods was known for his sharp intelligence, fast delivery, and unpredictable energy. He was undeniably talented, but often came with a certain intensity that made him difficult to manage on set. Redford, who preferred calm and order, found that energy overwhelming. According to casting insiders, Woods auditioned for multiple Redford-led or Redford-produced projects throughout the 1980s and early 1990s and 9. Despite his strong performances during readings, he was never cast. The reason, as later revealed in industry circles, had little to do with skill. Redford simply didn't want to work with him. In one instance, during an audition for a courtroom drama, Woods reportedly went off script to challenge Redford on his political views, specifically on the topic of the Vietnam War. What was meant to be a straightforward audition turned into a heated, philosophical debate. Redford, who had strong views but preferred to keep them separate from casting conversations, left the room. He later remarked in a private setting that Woods brought chaos into spaces that needed quiet. For Redford, who often took on stories involving nuance, reflection, and moral complexity, this kind of disruption was not only unhelpful, it was exhausting. Woods's approach to acting often included questioning the script, reinterpreting lines on the spot, and engaging in long conversations about character motivations, even during early casting stages. While some directors welcomed that level of engagement, Redford saw it differently. He believed in understanding a story as written, then using the actor's performance to enhance it, not to dominate or reshape it entirely. A well-known casting director from the era once described Woods as brilliant, but compared working with him to surviving a storm. You could get to a great result, but it required navigating a lot of unnecessary conflict. For Redford, who never saw acting as a battle of egos, that just wasn't worth it. One of the final attempts to bring the two together came during the pre-production phase of a legal thriller in the late 1980s. Woods was brought in to read for a key supporting role. The reading began strong, with Woods delivering a tightly controlled, emotionally layered performance. But midway through, he broke character to criticize a line's political implications, launching into a commentary on Cold War policy. Redford listened briefly, then closed his script and left the room without a word. According to someone close to the project, Redford later said, "If I wanted a debate, I'd go back to college." From that point forward, Woods's name was reportedly blacklisted from any Redford-involved production. In one set of casting notes, a phrase next to Woods's name read simply, "Never, ever." Years later, Woods would occasionally refer to unnamed Hollywood figures during interviews and panel discussions, criticizing what he called the industry's hypocrisy, particularly among those who preached peace and inclusion, but controlled projects with an iron grip. Though he never directly named Redford, many in the industry recognized the reference. Redford, for his part, refused to respond publicly. He didn't believe in airing grievances in the press, but his silence on the matter spoke volumes. The two actors never worked together, and after that final audition, were never seen in the same room again. Woods's career went on to include a number of acclaimed roles, especially in films requiring high emotional tension and intellectual sharpness. But as his public persona shifted more toward political commentary and controversy, his opportunities in mainstream Hollywood became less frequent. Redford continued making films, staying largely out of the spotlight and remaining focused on work that aligned with his principles. The second major example of Redford's quiet tension with a fellow actor involves someone far more familiar to audiences as a collaborator, Dustin Hoffman. Their work together in All the President's Men is still considered one of the great cinematic portrayals of journalism and political power. But behind the scenes, it was a challenging partnership. The two men approached acting in fundamentally different ways. Redford prepared meticulously, rehearsed for hours, and respected the script's structure. Hoffman, on the other hand, was famously spontaneous. He often improvised, shifted blocking during takes, and brought new ideas on set that hadn't been discussed in advance. Some directors appreciated that level of energy, others found it difficult to control. For Redford, it created an atmosphere of uncertainty that disrupted the rhythm he worked hard to create. Crew members from All the President's Men have spoken about the quiet tension between the two leads. It wasn't openly hostile. There were no shouting matches or dramatic walkouts, but there was a constant undercurrent of friction. Hoffman would rehearse a scene one way, then perform it differently during filming. This meant that Redford, who often had to respond or react, was left adjusting in real time. One scene in particular stands out. It was the phone call sequence inside the newsroom. Hoffman delivered the scene 7 different times, each with a different pacing, tone, and set of improvised lines. Redford, working from a tightly constructed emotional framework, was said to be visibly frustrated by the end. Director Alan J. Pakula managed to keep the peace and guide both actors toward the final version seen on screen, but their mood on set was often described as quietly strained. Redford believed acting was a team sport. For him, it wasn't about outshining your co-star or capturing a brilliant moment at someone else's expense. It was about serving the story, building something cohesive. Hoffman, in Redford's view, seemed more focused on capturing lightning in a bottle, even if it disrupted the overall structure. After All the President's Men, Redford and Hoffman never worked together again. When asked why, Redford would sometimes respond with a simple phrase, "Once was enough." There was no public fallout, no scandal. But when retrospectives or reunion panels were proposed, Redford declined. He had no interest in revisiting the experience. In interviews over the years, Redford never criticized Hoffman directly. In fact, he often praised his talent, but he also made it clear that their creative approaches were incompatible. For a film like All the President's Men, that tension may have contributed to the layered, compelling performances. But for Redford, the process behind the scenes mattered just as much as the result. These two examples, James Woods and Dustin Hoffman, highlight an important aspect of Redford's long and successful career. He wasn't just an actor or a director. He was a guardian of the filmmaking process. He believed in the integrity of the work, in maintaining a respectful and focused environment, and in making choices that supported the story rather than individual egos. When that balance was disrupted, he simply walked away. This approach helped him avoid many of the public feuds that defined other actors' careers, but it also meant that certain collaborations, no matter how promising on paper, never came to life or only happened once. Redford didn't need chaos to create great work. He believed in calm, in preparation, and in surrounding himself with people who shared those values. And over time, that philosophy became one of the defining features of his legacy. As Robert Redford took on more directorial and producing responsibilities throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, he began working with actors from a younger generation, stars who were already household names, but who often came from a very different creative mindset. One of the most difficult experiences of this era came with the 2007 political drama Lions for Lambs. Redford not only directed the film but also co-starred alongside Tom Cruise, who was also attached as a producer. The project seemed, at least on paper, like a potentially powerful collaboration. Redford brought decades of experience in politically charged, character-driven films, while Cruise was one of the most bankable stars in the world. He was looking to take on more serious roles and shift away from action-oriented blockbusters. But from the very beginning, the dynamic between them didn't quite work. According to people involved in the production, the creative divide between Redford and Cruise became clear almost immediately. Redford had envisioned a restrained, cerebral drama focused on themes like military intervention, institutional responsibility, and personal accountability. It was meant to be thoughtful and deliberately paced, allowing room for dialogue and introspection. Cruise, however, had a different vision. He was reportedly focused on how the film would be marketed, how each scene would be photographed, and how his character could be positioned as inspirational rather than morally ambiguous. As one crew member put it, Redford wanted the story to ask hard questions. Cruise wanted the story to inspire applause. This difference in intent made collaboration difficult. At meetings, Cruise often arrived with a team of publicists and image consultants. His notes on the script frequently included requests for line changes that would soften his character's edges or make his arc more heroic. Redford, who had spent his career trusting scripts, directors, and the organic flow of a scene, was frustrated by what he saw as unnecessary interference. In one instance during rehearsals, Cruise reportedly asked for on-call stylists to be present during blocking sessions so that his silhouette on camera could better reflect a sense of order and control. Redford privately found this baffling. He later remarked that while he was trying to show vulnerability in the scene, Cruise was more concerned with symmetry and visual branding. Even during production, the tension between the two actors never truly eased. Cruise would often stop scenes midway to request lighting changes or suggest new camera angles. While such requests aren't unusual for a producer-actor, Redford saw them as disruptions that pulled attention away from the storytelling. According to those on set, Redford tried to stay patient in the early weeks of filming, but by the third week he was visibly tired of the push and pull. In a quiet moment during one take, he was overheard asking Cruise, "Are we acting or are we selling a campaign ad?" The dynamic didn't improve during post-production. Cruise reportedly requested multiple cuts of his scenes, reviewing reaction shots frame by frame, and lobbying for edits that better aligned with his interpretation of the character. At one point, the studio intervened and sided with Cruise on a key decision. For Redford, that was the breaking point. He completed the version of the film he could, distanced himself from the press tour, and rarely spoke about the project again. Lions for Lambs was released to mixed reviews and disappointing box office numbers. Critics noted the film's uneven tone and lack of focus, with some pointing out that it felt like two different movies stitched together. For Redford, the experience left more than just professional frustration. It was a philosophical fracture, a reminder that not everyone approaches filmmaking with the same values. While Cruise moved on to other projects, Redford quietly stepped away from any future collaborations. When asked later in an interview what went wrong, he simply said, "It was one of the most frustrating projects of my career." The friction Redford experienced with Cruise wasn't an isolated case. Around the same period, he also reflected on his earlier work with actress Faye Dunaway during the production of 3 Days of the Condor in 1975. The film itself was a commercial and critical success, but behind the scenes, the atmosphere was reportedly tense and distant. Dunaway, who had just come off her celebrated performance in Chinatown, was known for her attention to detail and high standards. She often came to the set with strong opinions about character, lighting, and script changes. According to crew members, she frequently challenged director Sidney Pollack and sometimes delayed production by requesting additional takes or on-the-spot script adjustments. Redford, while deeply professional, struggled with the constant negotiation that working with Dunaway seemed to require. He preferred to trust the team, writers, directors, cinematographers, and believed in moving forward once a scene felt complete. Dunaway, by contrast, was known to push for precision, asking for multiple retakes to adjust inflection, timing, or eyeline. One crew member remembered Redford saying during a break, "We're not building a watch here," after Dunaway requested a fourth take of a minor dialogue exchange. In another moment, during a private meeting with the director, Dunaway questioned the emotional logic of a key scene. Redford, who had been silent until that point, reportedly interrupted with, "It's espionage, Faye, not Chekhov." Despite the tension, both actors delivered strong performances, and the film remains a classic of the political thriller genre. However, the distance between them never narrowed. Redford is said to have requested a body double be used for close-up shots involving Dunaway after she had completed filming. He also declined participation in retrospective interviews or reunion panels related to the film. When asked about Dunaway in an interview years later, Redford smiled and said, "She's unforgettable." It was a polite but distant remark, and no further collaboration followed. A similar breakdown happened on the set of The Natural, where Redford starred alongside Robert Duvall. The film, a stylized sports drama, is now considered one of Redford's defining roles. But working with Duvall presented significant challenges. Duvall, known for his improvisational instinct and raw emotional presence, didn't believe in rigidly sticking to the script. He preferred to let scenes unfold naturally, often changing lines, pacing, or even the emotional direction of a take without warning. Redford, who had spent weeks preparing his performance and was invested in maintaining the story's emotional arc, struggled with Duvall's unpredictable choices. During one pivotal scene, Duvall's improvisations reportedly undercut the tension Redford had worked to build. When asked to adjust, Duvall refused. The disagreement escalated into a loud argument in front of the crew. One sound technician recalled watching the exchange unfold, saying, "It was like a campfire turning into a forest fire." Director Barry Levinson eventually stepped in to mediate, and the scene was completed, but the relationship was damaged. Redford later said of Duvall, "He wanted to play jazz, I wanted to play composition. It wasn't music, it was noise." While Redford acknowledged Duvall's brilliance, the two never worked together again. Even during press tours, they were kept apart. Offers to reunite on future projects were quietly turned down by both sides. Each of these examples, Tom Cruise, Faye Dunaway, and Robert Duvall, represents a different type of creative clash. With Cruise, the tension was rooted in control and branding. With Dunaway, it came down to trust and process. With Duval, it was about instinct versus structure. But in all three cases, the outcome was the same. Redford, true to form, stepped away quietly and never returned. These were not public feuds. There were no headlines or public statements, just silent decisions made behind the scenes. Redford's philosophy remained consistent. Respect the process, honor the story, and surround yourself with collaborators who share those values. If that alignment broke down, he moved on, not out of spite, but out of principle. Redford, filmmaking was never about ego or dominance. It was about discipline, empathy, and focus. And over time, those values shaped not only the work he chose to do, but the people he chose to do it with. Throughout his long career, Robert Redford built a reputation for being composed, private, and respectful, traits that stood in sharp contrast to some of the louder personalities in the film industry. But beneath that poised exterior was a man who had his share of difficult creative partnerships, many of which left a lasting impact on how he approached collaboration. While most of his disagreements remained behind closed doors, insiders have often shared details about strained relationships with several prominent actors. These weren't public feuds. There were no shouting matches captured by the press or headlines driven by gossip. But the working relationships themselves, in many cases, quietly fell apart and never resumed. One such example was Redford's experience working with Gene Hackman. Their only on-screen collaboration came in Downhill Racer, an early film in Redford's career. On paper, they were two actors at the top of their game. Hackman brought intensity and emotional power to every role, often commanding the screen with his forceful presence. Redford, meanwhile, leaned toward control, subtlety, and technical discipline. The combination, however, didn't create balance. It caused friction. Crew members from Downhill Racer recalled that Hackman would often ignore direction during rehearsals and push back against creative decisions that didn't suit him. He was known for his unpredictable mood on set, sometimes brilliant, sometimes combative. While Redford respected Hackman's raw talent, he reportedly found the volatility draining. The breaking point came during a particularly delicate scene that relied on nuance and careful emotional pacing. Hackman, unhappy with the lighting setup, refused to leave his trailer and delayed the production. After nearly an hour, Redford walked to the trailer himself and calmly told Hackman, "This isn't your movie, Gene. It's a team effort. Show up or step aside." Hackman returned to set, but the atmosphere remained cold. The two never spoke, off camera again. Although Redford never publicly criticized Hackman, he referred to him in private as a sledgehammer in a violin shop, a metaphor that said everything about how their styles clashed. It wasn't about talent. Redford repeatedly acknowledged Hackman's brilliance. It was about temperament, respect, and process. Over the years, when Hackman's name came up during casting discussions for other Redford projects, Redford quietly passed. One studio executive shared that Redford would write "brilliant actor, impossible human" in the margins of casting sheets. There was also a noticeable disconnect between Redford and James Woods. While the two never worked together on a film, Woods auditioned for Redford's project more than once. Each time he was passed over. Later, Redford revealed the reason was less about ability and more about energy. He found Woods deeply unsettling, both personally and politically. At one casting session, Woods reportedly used the time to launch into a critique of the Vietnam War and challenge Redford's views on American foreign policy. It was supposed to be a read for a supporting role in a courtroom drama. Redford left the room before the scene was finished. Years later, Redford said of Woods, "He brought chaos to places that needed quiet." It wasn't just about politics, although their views were clearly at odds. It was about tone, about control. Woods liked to debate. He thrived on intellectual challenge and often entered a room ready to take over the conversation. Redford preferred a quieter space, one that allowed for reflection, layering, and collaborative storytelling. To Redford, Woods seemed more interested in dominating the narrative than understanding it. The tension between the two became something of an open secret in casting circles. One director remembered a particularly tense pre-production meeting in the 1980s when Woods auditioned for a film Redford was producing. Woods performed with typical precision, but paused halfway through the scene to question a line's political implications. Redford listened briefly, closed the script, and walked out. Afterward, he remarked, "If I wanted a debate, I'd go back to college." Even though Woods never publicly named Redford, he took shots in interviews at unnamed Hollywood figures he called hypocrites preaching peace while running studios like military generals. Insiders understood the reference. Redford never responded, but it was clear that Woods would never be considered again. His name reportedly had a simple note beside it in Redford's casting files: "Never, ever." Rovert's preference for calm, considered collaboration also created friction with Dustin Hoffman. Their work together in All the President's Men was iconic and critically acclaimed, but the filming process revealed stark contrasts in their creative approaches. Hoffman was spontaneous and often improvised, sometimes changing his performance in the middle of a scene or adjusting blocking without notice. Redford, a disciplined and exacting performer, found this difficult to manage. Though their relationship never became openly hostile, the production was marked by underlying tension. Crew members described the atmosphere as uneasy. Hoffman's need to rehearse a scene one way and then deliver it another made it hard for Redford to maintain the rhythm and emotional tone he had prepared. One phone call scene in particular required several takes because Hoffman kept delivering the lines differently each time. By the end of the sequence, Redford was reportedly seething. Director Alan J. Pakula managed to keep the project on track without letting the tension explode. The result was one of the most memorable political dramas of the 1970s. But behind the scenes, Redford was growing frustrated. He believed that acting was a team sport, about consistency, rhythm, and trust. Hoffman, in his eyes, was acting for himself, chasing unpredictable emotional spikes instead of a shared arc. Years later, when asked why the two never reunited, Redford said simply, "Once was enough." Another difficult collaboration came with Faye Dunaway on 3 Days of the Condor. Though the film was critically acclaimed, the behind-the-scenes relationship between Redford and Dunaway was, at best, strained. Dunaway, known for her meticulous preparation and firm creative opinions, regularly challenged the director and demanded adjustments to lighting, dialogue, and delivery. Redford respected her as an actress, but he often found himself caught in the crossfire of her perfectionism and mistrust. On set, the tension was noticeable. Dunaway would ask for multiple takes of single lines, often tweaking her performance down to the syllable. Redford, who preferred to trust instincts and momentum, grew increasingly annoyed. At one point, he was overheard saying, "We're not building a watch here," after Dunaway requested a fourth reset during a minor scene. During a private meeting about character motivation, Redford cut in and said, "It's espionage, Faye, not Chekhov." Despite the on-screen intimacy their roles required, there was little warmth between them off camera. Redford later requested a body double be used for her insert shots after she wrapped. In interviews, when asked about her, he offered only carefully chosen words. "She's unforgettable." They never worked together again. These behind-the-scenes stories show that even the most admired and composed professionals have their limits. Redford rarely spoke publicly about these tensions, but he made quiet choices to protect the kind of working environment he believed in. He valued professionalism, calm, and mutual respect. When those conditions weren't met, he moved on. His career is full of critically acclaimed performances and iconic collaborations, but it also tells a quieter story, one of carefully drawn lines and thoughtful exit. He didn't chase headlines, didn't engage in public disputes, and didn't retaliate. He simply chose not to return. That philosophy helped preserve not only his image, but also the integrity of the projects he truly believed in. It's easy to admire Robert Redford for his screen presence, but the full picture only comes into focus when you look behind the camera. where he quietly stood firm in a world that didn't always share his values.